Hey painting students, Art 26. Wanted to talk about the boards that we're going to be using. You have three. They're all 10 by 14. They all are going to coordinate with 3 5 by 7 images throughout the semester. We're going to address 3 different kinds of organization of value and color. One is going to be a value study, one is going to be a monochromatic color system, and the third is going to be a local color, which is the most difficult. These are small paintings designed to adapt to the spaces that you're now in instead of the classroom on the large easels. And rather than canvas, which cannot be pushed against because it's not sturdy, these are boards. But they have the same surface as a canvas and they work really well for our needs. I wrote in the modules, and I probably have repeated it one too many times, but I want to make sure you know, when your supplies arrive, the boards are white, and just take a pencil and grid it 2 by 2. And I did a demo on how to do it with paint as well as with pencil, I believe. I did. Yeah, I did. But in this case, when we have our images, we'll know whether it's vertical or horizontal. If it's vertical, we're going to do numbers, numbers, letters, letters. If it's horizontal, you turn it and do numbers, numbers, letters, letters. All sides. You want to write it down real low on there with a pencil. And there will be times in your image where there's moments that are so complex that you can't possibly figure out the square. In those cases, you're going to split it in half and in half. So it'll be 1, 1, 1, 1 on here, and half, 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 half on the picture. You don't have to do it all over. Some people prefer to just start with all 1 inch here and all ½ inch there. It's more tedious, but accuracy is way better. What I like to do if I'm doing a grid, grid is kind of they consider it a crutch in a way, but it's a really great way to organize space and helpful for continue your training as a renderer of accuracy, and it breaks down things into parts, and so I don't have a problem with it. But something that's helpful when a square of this is really hard is, again, just split it. You might even have an area that's really hard, so you split it, split it, split it, split it, and then correspond it to the paper image. You can print multiple versions of that paper so that it doesn't get too messy. You can use different colors on it. Whatever it takes, you don't get lost in the puzzle. To save on materials, I also am using the same boards as the warm-ups for each project. The beauty of paint is the more paint on there, the better. The more mistakes, the better. The more layers on other layers that were mistakes, the better. Every time it gets richer. So you can have 10 or 15 paintings on this surface by the time you get rid of that board or sell it or whatever. The more we build, the better. You can see this is an old one. It's just like layers. Doesn't matter. Once we have that grid on there, we're going to use it as the warm-up, and then we're going to use it again as the painting. So you paint right over it. Now, if it's distracting when we're done here, just paint white over it when it's dry and fix your grid and start over. Now I'm just going to leave it because it's just going to dry, and then, it's going to be shaped in the same way anyway. Because what we do these warm-ups on is the scale is already there. It's already here. And rather than doing a 7-step value scale, which was my original plan, it's just very complex and it's long, and mostly it wastes your paint. So we're just going to do a 5. So we're going to go this way to do our hard edge, black to white, even steps value scale. Skip a row just so it can dry, and then we're going to do our blended, which is really tricky too. It should be softly blended. And you can redo these scales as many times as it takes before you turn them in to be graded. They have to be smooth, they have to be even steps. This can take a long time. I once took a class where all we did was value scales the entire semester. 3-step, 5-step, 7-step, 9-step, 10-step, 15. It went on and on till 100. That's how important it is as an artist to train your eye to see value. and compare it to other values. This first project will really help you work with that, as well as the techniques of blending and hard edge. So we're just doing 5. So I'm going to do here, and I'm going to set this aside because in order for you to be able to see the paint and what I'm doing, I'm scaling it down a little on a side piece so you can see. But I wanted you to see this is what you're going to be doing your scale on, and this is what you're going to be doing your first painting on once we get together and talk about that. All right, so I have here my palette that you saw before. I'm gonna stand. I'm not comfortable sitting when I work. So remember how we talked about getting the clean ones on there first? That's what I'm gonna do first. This is still my 2 value. I gotta take a slightly damp paper towel and clean this off because I gotta make sure it's clean. My brushes are clean. Now, I mentioned briefly the difference between flat and round brushes. These are all flats. Well, these are considered brights, but they're all flats basically. And you never want to use a brush that's too small for the area that you're filling. These boards are relatively small, so I have a lot of smaller brushes on the list, but I did have one in there for things like big areas of negative space, scales. This brush matches best with this size. So you don't want to use a little brush like this to try to fill a square like this. It's just too small. And the bigger the brush, the better the result in terms of consistency. So I'm planning, looking at this, I'm going to use these bigger brushes. And you can do the whole thing with one too. I just don't have to clean as much if I do it with that. So I'm going to maneuver my white again just because it was the one I added. Palette knife work is always time consuming. But again, the way your palette looks, that's how your picture looks. Whenever a picture gets all muddy and weird and I go by it, I look down and the palette's all over the place and there's streaks everywhere and people are using a brush to mix, that's a disaster. Never use a brush to mix. Never. Not only does it ruin your brush, but it creates terrible consistency in the pile. It's just, it's terrible. Just don't ever use it. Brushes are meant to deliver paint to the surface. They're not intended to mix it. Okay, so when you use your flat brush, you want to fold it into the pile fully. You want to saturate it in there. You don't want to have this little tip of stuff on the end of your brush like all tepid. This is not a delicate medium. The processes of blending are, but you don't want to be all dipping all slow like with ink or watercolor. This is you have to really commit. So I'm committing to this pile of white all the way around my brush. And every time I go to a new value, I'm going to saturate the brush in the new paint, making sure it's all the same and not mushed together still. But the main thing is if you don't have the right consistency mixing in terms of water and paint, if you don't have the right size brush, and if you don't have the right amount of saturation on it to deliver it, that's where you get into problems. All right, so anyway, I'm gonna start with white. I'm gonna start on this end. Now, when you place paint down, people, what they do, I'm gonna put it here. This is what people do. They try to like get it on, and then they come back and they get more, and then you can't approach it that way. It's too delicate, I guess I could say. I don't know how to say. What you got to do is blob it. Literally blob the paint on the surface and then pull it around, move it around. It's like clay. You have to have enough of it to work with to do it. So I don't know if you'll be able to see right here, but I'm going to blob it. Blob it. you want to be able to blob enough paint in that square so that you don't ever have to come back to this until you're done with this. Now, this is going to be harder to see with the white, but then I'll switch. I'm going to turn the light and see if that helps. Yeah, a little. All right, so in here, what you want to, there's 3 different ways to use a flat brush. One is touch the edge, pull it towards you. Touch the edge, pull it towards you. Touch the edge, pull it towards you. Because it's a square brush and a square area. That's one way to do it. Another way is, see, you have extra paint in here, that's the point. But the key is to keep moving the paint around so you don't have that horrible texture that you have to sandpaper off later, and yet you don't want it to be watery, yet you don't want it to be too timid so you don't have anything to blend with. So it's kind of a balancing act. So that's one way, going like this. This is called hard edge painting. You can also turn your body and do it this way. Okay, this is the other method, side to side. You always want to kind of use a combination of all of them. With painting, the more your body moves around, the better. You don't want to just sit in a chair. Now, unless you're working from direct observation, like a still life or a figure, of course you have to stay exactly where you are. But when you're working with a painting that you can take moments to go around. All right, so you got that one. Then this is the third one, where it bends slightly, and see the little bead on the side? That enables you to pull it this way. And you have to hold your breath when you're doing it. Hard edge painting is a lot about holding your breath. Now this would have probably 3 more coats on it later, but I want to make sure before I leave it that I don't have any texture. So I'm kind of using the brush or my finger as a sponge to make sure I'm not leaving behind a texture that I don't want. Now I can always redo a layer, but I can't get rid of a texture. At the same time, like I said, you don't want it watery either. If you get a little edge like this, boom. Get a little edge like that, boom. Get rid of it, go back over it. It's like a nuancing of the surface. This might be better to see the next one. So I'm gonna now dip my brush, saturate it in the next value, spin it, make sure I don't have any of the old white in there. I have like my light gray now. See if this comes out better. Okay, blob. You gotta get enough paint on there to blob it on there. And then I'm gonna do this pull back this way. I'm doing a double here. I got the top and the sides going. And see how I'm leaning on my arm? You gotta lean on your pinky, your arm, or a steady stick, which we use in class. You won't be using that for this size, but anything to keep you steady. Painting is a lot about years and years of practice and methods and techniques, getting comfortable, maneuvering and controlling it. As you cover the little pencil lines between, you'll be able to better assess your values. You can always go back and adopt those. But you can see this is going to need another coat. But instead of doing other coats now, I'm going to wait because here's a little texture I got to get rid of. I'll do another coat later because it takes time to dry. So I'm going to keep going here. Since I'm getting into darker, I didn't wash my brush on that one. I just wetted a little. Still want to flip it though and make sure that because you know everything dries darker anyway, so it doesn't hurt if my brush is going towards dark as opposed to the other way. It's almost never the case where people stay too light too long. It always is too dark. Anyway, you know, over time you'll be able to do these really fast, but I just wanted to show you kind of how you want to do that bending, slow, hold your breath side to side, maneuvering the brush, and boom, boom, boom. Now I might say to myself, look, this one's too dark now. This one's too light. But instead of dealing with that right now, I'm just going to keep going. because I can come back, and since I'm feeling it might be dark, I'm just going to go ahead and remix this. Use a different one. This got a little like that. So again, whenever you find yourself like you feel like you might be mixing, inadvertently starting to mix with your brush, grab your knife, get it back together, because once you don't want to go down that road. But I still want to spin this in the new value, but no point rinsing because we're all in the same direction, but I don't want to have streakies. So it's still, but I'm not mixing, I'm just saturating. All right, then I blob. If you ever go out of the lines, big deal, you paint over it later. Everything with paint is covered with paint. Not a big deal. And remember, you're actually building a nice little layer here underneath your painting. Something's going on here. And I won't know until I re-coat the white. But I'm not going to get side swiped. I'm going to, keep going. And I want to show you the blending too. And before I get my water too messed up, I'm going to get, again, I got to use this because my pile got a little dry, but not too dry where I have to. Black goes such a long way that I think I'm just going to not use more. We'll see. This is kind of a weird texture. It's like with black, you just don't want to do a lot with it. My paint is so thick that I'm gonna put a little medium. Medium is good when you are someone who wants more of a slick consistency, but you don't want to dilute basics. They're very thick, thin as it is. It's tricky. But these paints, see how it's just working better? It just makes the consistency better. There's all kinds of different fluids that you can combine with all kinds of different paints. All right, so let me just apply this before I move on. Blob, blob. Then by putting these black and whites on the ends, you'll be able to really assess the values. Of course, the middle values are always the trickiest. I've got this weird little texture on this paper. Anyway, I'll do another layer later. But I just wanted to kind of start to get a sense. I'm going to come back and fix that. It looks like a watered down. I don't know what's on here. It's like a rubbing alcohol or something that's on here. No. It's not me. I'm not doing streaky. It's just that. Okay, we'll get to that. So I know when I have this on my brush, you can put a little here because you know you're going to be blending 2 rows down. You can do it in 1 row, but it's just better because it's dry. So we're going to blend this into, hold on. Wow. Again, anytime that happens, just grab your knife. And remember, this is going to be a timing thing because it dries so fast. But I'm going to start blending this together. And I'm doing it with crisscross. And I'll show you a few techniques that really help. You need to blend while it's still wet. And we're going to go from complete black. We'll use a different brush for that, just to make sure I get that in there on the end. See now what I'm doing? I call this crisscross. I'm holding the brush at the end, and I'm very, very slowly, gently putting crisscross together at the end. It's not watery, but it's not too thick. In those examples that we will look at, some people are a little looser with this, but it still conveys this sense of blending together, and you can see how soft, and the minute that the paint starts to dry, you're in trouble. So when you're doing your painting, you have to be, if I can make this closer, I'll hold it up in a bit. But when you're doing these small paintings on these boards, we're going to be looking really closely at your blending technique. So this is we're weaving this value, which I would say is the darkest, or black, into a dark gray. So I've got my black brush, my dark gray brush, and now I'm grabbing a medium gray brush. It's very difficult to blend all with the same brush. It's a lot of work for nothing, because first of all, the brush might be the right thickness or size. Also, you're just pulling one value into another. There's no distinction, and you don't get the same. It ends up flat. So here, see how I'm adding this value here, but see how I'm softly pulling it in. Now this brush has a softer touch, I can tell. You'll have your favorites, and when you find your favorites, you'll end up getting more at some point of your favorites. But remember, I'm being subtle because I got to get all the way down there. I want to still keep it in the hard edge shape, but I'm just very gently pulling it together. You can do this multiple times, but the key is only when the paint is wet. The minute it starts to dry, you gotta stop, regroup, let it dry, go back. So I'm gonna use now flat brush in this value. And I can always come back to the end and do stuff. Okay, see how this is obviously jumpy now? Of course, get enough paint on there. You don't want it to be watery, so I'm gonna pick up a little extra here. This is part of why too, if you mix all your values at the right amount before you start, the amount for the space you're working on, you don't have to grab tubes. Okay, that's getting better. See the crisscross? Now, when you're doing cross contour painting, which we're gonna draw in lines before you start, you're basically figuring out the way that things move. And things move in various ways. A lot of people don't see it as more than one way. Like if you have a ball, you can see that on here. If you have a ball in your picture, or around anything that's three-dimensional, you know it moves around itself. That's the cartoon edge. That's the flat line that everybody likes to emphasize. But what it also does is it swings this way, and then people who've taken a drawing class generally are aware of that. And then if you've really dug a little deeper, you also know that this thing moves this way, that way, like a beach ball. So you've got this cross contour movement. Around is the regular contour, but across is cross contour, and this is in the module. Around is always the least important thing in a painting. It's figuring out the across, the up and down, the side to side, the crisscross, the technique, placing the values where they go, the proportions, one size thing to another. The last thing is the shape. You want to lose your shape often and then pull it back with the negative space. That back and forth is what makes a painting a painting. For example, if I were to do this ball and I did something like that and it got too big, I don't care, because I'm focused on the cross contour, and then I got to look at the values. Is it dark in here? Something we're going to do is with this cross contour is mix and blend in the direction that it moves. That's why we're going to do those lines first. We're going to do crisscross to blend where we need to blend. We're going to pull in wet paint into another paint. We're so focused on technique here that this ball might get completely gone in shape. It's just like a portrait. You never draw the shape of the head or the neck or the shoulders first. That you're just doing, I mean, you're going to have a little cartoon, cute little face, but it's not going to be accurate. It always gets smaller than it should be. You know, think of this as that. Any kind of form that you're painting is going to be explored in terms of its surfaces, how it moves, where the values are, where it blends. It's a whole deal. At the end, when you feel like it's where you want it to be, then we come in and deal with the shape. And a lot of times it's gotten lost to the point where you have to go get your original grid and redraw on the grid where it lost itself. Not always, but sometimes. So painting is a lot like charcoal or pastel. It's like the opposite of pencil, because pencil's so linear unless you really press hard and make shapes. But we come in a lot here with our hard edge and shape things later. In fact, it's more accurate that way. You know, and if there's a horizon line or something. And I'm leaning on my pinky again. Always hold your breath a little when you do these hard edges. So we may have a combo here again of negative space, value range comparisons, blending, but the cross contour is a really helpful way to start your picture. Because, for example, on this thing we would be doing, let's say if this were dark in here, this would be wet paint, and then we would have to move up to the next value, and then we'd have to move up to the next value, and see, pulling it together. This is what we're doing in the blended area. But it's just kind of an example of how, by analyzing how this thing moves, we analyze the direction in which we blend. It's not just swinging side to side. People love to blend like this. They just love it, side to side, like the sky, side to side. No, it's up and down blending. It's in little nooks and crannies blending. It's cross contour. It's really taking a look at the values. It's a process. So I don't ever want you to feel like you've lost your line drawing. The grid is only a place to start. It's only a place to start. And these techniques that we're practicing with here are key to what happens here. Because this, you know, everything moves in different directions. Anyway, I could get myself all carried away here. But anyway, I want you to kind of focus on the warm-up. I got side-blinded because one thing connects to another. But okay, so anyway, I'm going to keep going here. Now it's dry, completely dry. I took too long, so I got to start over. This one's all right. I think I can blend into here. As long as you do one small area at a time, you won't have to come back to it as many times. If you try to do the whole strip or half of a strip or even a third of a strip on the bigger format, you're going to have some issues. But again, I keep coming back to this brush because it's bigger. Blending is smoother the bigger the brush and the more paint that you have on it without getting the texture. That's the key. Problem is our surfaces are so small that you're going to have to be using smaller brushes inside some of those areas, which is fine. But on the scale, you can start getting familiar with that, the larger brush that's on there. See, now I'm feathering. It's like a feathering, and the further back I can hold the handle, the more effective the blending. Because I'm not as in control, so I'm more soft. And brushes are also long, so you can sit back in a chair and really have distance. So I'm doing it by standing. You guys can prop your boards. You can, if you have an easel, put them on there. table easel, whatever, but even standing here, I'm getting more softness because I'm standing and I'm holding the brush at the end and I'm starting to get a flow. The other thing you can do, which is going to be really key in your paintings, is use a big brush first to put a pool of white or a pool of light gray. I like to start with a lighter pool only because it gets so dark so fast and that black just takes over. So you can see even over here it's kind of getting a little bit darker than I want. So if I do this and do my blob like I did here, I can now switch to this sweet little flat brush, which I'm really starting to get into right now, and just kind of feather it in. Again, the further you hold it, the better. And the softer it blends, the better. And if it messes up, you can do something about it if it's wet, only if you can put this other value next to it back into it. That's why you have to have 3 brushes going at all times. If you don't have, oh, that's way too dark. That's not good. If you don't have 3 brushes, the problem is you have to try to quickly rinse and reuse the same one and it doesn't pull each other together. If you have 3, in this case I'm still on medium dark darkest. As I move down here it's going to be a little more medium light lightest white. See, this way I can pull it together by using different brushes, and the bigger brush makes sure that I have enough paint on there. But see, it's going to get edgy. If it gets edgy and you can't get it in time and you haven't grabbed the right value of the other brush, you got to take a break. You got to leave it alone, come back later, because you can only do an area at a time. Now, because this edge here is still a little bit wet, I can come in and pull it together. This time I didn't have a big old blob of dark value on there. But see how I'm not just going side to side. I'm going up and down. This is great for backgrounds if you want to create a value real gradually. Super good for objects that have smooth. And I've made sure for the projects that you have a combination of hard edge and blending. They're just 2 techniques that are absolutely important to master if you're going to paint successfully. Alright, so I'm getting to the end here. At this point I would take a clean brush and put white on the end. I've used up all my brushes. Oh, you know what I'll do? I'll use my palette knife. Obviously I'm not encouraging palette knife painting in these projects, but if you take intermediate or studio, at some point you're going to do an impressionism piece where we do use these. I just wanted to get it out there before I contaminated this side of it. I'm going to have to come back later and do other coats up here anyway, but I just wanted to complete this process without having everything gray all the way. So this is warm-up number 1. It's not easy, but it's pretty fun. It's hard, but painting is hard. And in a way, for me anyway, that's why it's fun for me, because it's always a challenge. It's always sort of a personal exploration, and it takes so much discipline and patience and frustration, and there's good days and bad days, and it's also so exciting and rewarding and powerful when things work out the way you want. And I really can't wait to see what you all come up with this semester, and I'm here along the way, as are all of your classmates, and I'm excited. And if you ever have questions, just send me an email. And all right, See, now I want to fix it all, but hey, you know, you get the gist. See you soon. Bye.